Dead Ends 6. Bad Blood 1. Baby Starkweather was born prematurely on a snowy Halloween night in a little thatched cottage on the side of a steep hill known locally as Buck's Hill. There was a lot of blood. With so much blood, the infant Starkweather's mother didn't make it through the birth. Midwife Shelley was left with a gushing hemorrhage she couldn't control. She'd always wondered why the unassuming but brave midwife stepped into the scene on TV and demanded warm water and towels. She had never understood that until the bloodiest Halloween night in history. There was so much of the red stuff that the newborn almost drowned in it. In time, some would say baby Starkweather drowned in blood, and the result resembled what occurs when babies are deprived of oxygen for more than 5 minutes. But not exactly. In reality, Shelley wasn't a midwife at all, but the baby's aunt. The Starkweather sisters worked in the office at the sawmill down the hill. A blanket of snow covered the landscape on that October 31st night, and the only road off the windswept mountain was a glassy sheet of black ice. They had no choice but to opt for a home birth, which caught the Starkweather sisters by surprise. On top of that was the strange fact that Shelley's sister's pregnancy lasted half the normal 9 months gestation period. But perhaps the biggest mystery was the baby's father. Her sister never revealed who the baby's father was. Suffice to say that he came in the night, and absconded into the same night. It was as if her sister had left her bedroom window open for her romantic interest. This was irregular, because the sisters lived under the same thatched roof and lived alone. They were known as the nuns in town, for the love of God. That said a lot in a place like Oldcastle. Once distraught, Shelley Starkweather called the relevant authorities. She swaddled the newborn in a warm blanket and gripped him. Her eyes darted between the infant's deathly pale face in the glow of the open fire in the living room and his dead mother lying on the bloodied sheep's wool rug in front of the fireplace. Shelley's eyes rested on those vast crimson stains on the white rug. That image had a peculiar effect on her, and all she could think about was her sister's blood soaking into the roots of the wool rug that had come from a skinned, slaughtered sheep, which had donated its flesh, wool, and entire tasty mutton carcass. But most of all, Shelley Starkweather wondered about this little mystery bundle. She racked her brain, trying to decipher who the father was. Whoever he was, he had obligations now. Shelley went through 15 suitors in town, but couldn't decide on any of them for sure. Her sister had not given her any clue who she might have been liaising with. The baby's aunt thought back to the first time she noticed when her sister started to show. That slight swelling in the tummy area and avoiding drinking their normal tipple of rum before bedtime. Yes, she recalled the night her sister had refused the nightcap. That was the same August weekend she heard odd sounds coming through the straw roof, sounding like someone walking across her ceiling in the middle of the night. Shelley slept in the attic, right beneath the thatched roof. She put it down to a strange dream and never recalled it until now, as she watched baby Starkweather suck on her bloody thumb. Shelley gagged and took the child to be washed. As she crossed to the kitchen sink and filled a pot of water, she saw how baby Starkweather sniffed at his little hand, and how his tiny pale tongue darted from his mouth and licked the blood from his fingers. He enjoyed blood, and it turned his aunt's stomach. There was some consolation in knowing that it was just a baby, and that's what babies do, suck their fingers. Only baby Starkweather relished the plasma, nutrients, red and white cells and platelets. Little Starkweather smacked his lips and his nostrils pulsed. It sickened Shelley to see how his dead mother's blood, her sister's lifeblood, had turned his tongue red, as if the infant Starkweather was sucking on a strawberry lollipop. But over the coming hours, Shelley realized there was something very odd about baby Starkweather. She didn't have any baby experience, but she had her female gut instinct, and she didn't like what her gut was whispering to her. Shelley Starkweather formally adopted her sister's baby. She felt she owed it to the child. Other than the normal reasons for wanting to adopt the baby, Shelley felt guilt-ridden for having her sister die in her watch and leaving the child without a mother. She could make up for it by taking the child under her wing. But an issue soon manifested. The child refused to drink from his bottle of formula milk. Shelley tried everything. She took him to the family GP, who was of no help, then to expensive experts in the city, all to no avail. She even bought a latex breast filled with formula milk and became the surrogate mother she never wanted to be. But the baby was wasting away before her eyes. She was desperate to keep him alive and would do anything. Shelley had let her sister die, but she wouldn't let her baby die. Shelley took her nephew, now her son, to Limerick City Hospital, where they put the month-old baby on a drip through which they fed the child. It ripped at her heart to see how the clumsy nurses couldn't find a good vein to insert the drip line. The baby screamed with every failed attempt. Tears came to Shelley's eyes, and she had to turn away. But that only made it worse. But something odd happened during those horrid moments while the incompetent staff used baby Starkweather as a human pincushion. In the struggle to find a good vein in the baby's tiny arm, the amateur pediatric nurses wiped up the blood droplets in a gauze and left the bloody gauze on the bed by the baby's head. The 3 bloodied gauzes had a strange effect on the tiny tot. In their struggle to find the much-coveted good vein, the hospital staff didn't see how the infant's nostrils flexed and his head turned in the blood's direction. Baby Starkweather's tropical sea blue eyes searched for the source of the scent. Shelley was sure the nurses didn't notice how his little noggin inched towards the bloodied gauze and his pink tongue darted in and out from the corner of his mouth in a reptilian fashion. The nurses found a good vein and drip-fed baby Starkweather through an IV line. But by 10 o'clock that night, the baby was on a life support machine. The infant had an adverse reaction to his intravenous food. The staff couldn't understand it. The baby screamed and broke out in a terrible rash, red and raw like a birthmark. Baby Starkweather had an adverse reaction to everything and anything, including calories, proteins, fats, and electrolytes, including sodium, potassium, chloride, magnesium, and calcium. The pediatric nurses told this to Shelley, word for word, but Shelley was thinking about how the nurses cleared away those bloody gauzes, and the infant's striking eyes followed the staff with pinpoint accuracy as they left the ward, sniffing at the bloody trail they left behind them. She couldn't just watch him wither away like that in the little cot. She picked him up and held him in her arms. He weighed nothing. The foster mother could have been holding a bunch of rags in a baby grow. Shelley Starkweather remembered the night the infant sucked the blood from his thumb and how he licked his lips. Sitting there in the pediatric ward, she had a light bulb moment. A pretty twisted light bulb moment, to be fair. She searched her handbag, but there was nothing sharp or pointy enough to do the job. Then she looked about the room for a suitable tool. Nope, nothing there. Shelley left the ward and went downstairs to the cafe, where she scanned the counter for a suitable implement to do the job. All she needed was something with a small pointed tip, enough to pierce the skin. She spotted a plastic jar of toothpicks by the cash register. She was about to ask for one when she decided it was a bad idea. She wasn't sure if a toothpick was sharp enough to pierce her skin, but more worryingly, what if the tip of the toothpick broke off in her flesh? Having a wood splinter stuck in her skin was no joke, and it could cause an infection. No, that wouldn't work. Shelley scanned the hospital cafe again. She was about to give up hope when she saw a missing cat poster pinned to a notice board over by the display case containing jam donuts and other yummy offerings. Cute cat, but it was more about the thumbtacks pinning the poster. She sidled up to the notice board and plucked one tack from the cork board, then went downstairs. Halfway up the stairs, an icy prickle of fear crept over her. Shelley felt a sudden urge to bound up those stairs. As she approached the tiny cot in the ward, her heart fluttered at seeing the baby, so small and insignificant she could hardly see him. The infant had turned a lighter shade of pale and looked too still for Shelley's liking. A sob clutched in her throat. She reached down and picked him up. He was limp but breathing. She panicked and was about to scream for help when she remembered the reason she had gone down to the cafe. Holding the baby in her left arm, she searched her right pocket for her thumbtack. It was in there, and she bloody well knew it because it was pinching her. She had shoved it in there without thinking when she saw the state of the child. Shelley sat on the uncomfortable plastic chair with her adopted son in her arms. Taking a cautious glance about the quiet ward in relative darkness, she pricked the tip of the small finger of her right hand. She winced in pain as she squeezed the blood from the wound and watched the droplets of blood appear at the tip of her pinky and fill out. No sooner had the blood bloomed when baby Starkweather showed signs of life. turning in his blanket in the direction of Shelley's finger. By God, it was amazing and terrifying to witness. She dabbed the forefinger of her right hand onto the crimson droplet and, taking another glance around, rubbed her finger on the baby's lips. Shelley's blood had the effect of smelling salts on the infant. Little Starkweather suckled at thin air as if slurping from an invisible bottle of milk. Heart pounding, Shelley dabbed the child's lips on the red stuff, and the little guy turned ravenous. He took Shelley's small finger in both of his miniature hands, like a squirrel clutching a hazelnut, and guided her finger into his mouth and sucked, just like any baby on instinct, and sucked, until Shelley's finger throbbed as the baby siphoned his blood donor. It wasn't long before a group of nurses and doctors gathered at young Starkweather's bedside, watching how the infant sucked on Shelley's little finger. The loud smack of minute lips filled this corner of the hospital room. They thought it was hilarious and awe-inspiring how the baby had made such a turnaround, not because the baby was drinking blood right before their eyes. They took pride in their work, nodding approvingly. Shelley smiled back and kept her pinky finger in the young child's mouth. Not that she had any choice. The child latched onto her like a tick. The next morning, baby Starkweather looked healthy, with rosy cheeks and a full belly. Like a vampire bat, the infant satisfied his hunger with his adoptive mother's blood during the night. When the nurses and doctors approached the Starkweather cot on their rounds, they couldn't believe the improvement the baby had made overnight. But the mother's deterioration equally startled them. "Are you okay?" asked one nurse. "You look a little peaky." "That's one way of putting it," said her colleague, the same nurse who had made various failed attempts at finding a good vein. "She looks half dead." "I have slept little," said Shelley, feeling as weak as she looked. "You need to get some sugar into you, my dear," said the third nurse. "And blood, maybe," Shelley thought. Pincushion suggested, "Why don't you take yourself down to the cafe and get yourself a mug of coffee and one of those delicious custard slices? It'll do you the world of good." Her younger colleague added with a chortle, "I was getting too fond of them. You'll find them in the display case over by the notice board." Shelley finished in a weak tone. "Yes, I saw them. They look tasty." They smiled at the babe in arms suckling on Shelley's finger, without knowing the infant was literally sucking the life out of his foster mother in front of them. His belly had tripled in size. Shelley didn't want the health professionals to see baby Starkweather's distended tummy, because that would lead to all kinds of awkward questions and answers. When one nurse went to take the child from her to allow her to go downstairs and eat, Shelley asked if it would be possible to do it a little later, as the infant was settled. They paused before agreeing. God knows, but nobody ever said being a mother was easy. By now she knew there was something very wrong with baby Starkweather, but Shelley pledged she would save the oddity's life. She wasn't prepared to lose her sister and her sister's baby. She just wanted to bring the infant back from the dead. That's all. Then Shelley would face whatever she needed to face in life. Knowing the hospital professionals did not know what they were dealing with, Shelley discharged the baby against the wishes of the hospital. 2. By the time baby Starkweather celebrated his 3rd birthday, Shelley Starkweather had grown old prematurely, taking on the aspect of an advanced substance addict, shriveled and worn, and she had the track marks to show it, only they were teeth marks. The toddler had formidable baby teeth, or milk teeth, as they were called, in an average normal household. But the Starkweather thatched cottage was anything but normal. No, this boy had blood teeth. The child had the mouth and jaws of a piranha fish. Shelley Starkweather did everything to keep the toddler in blood, but she had reached the end of her tether. She couldn't keep up with the child's voracious feeding times. Baby Starkweather was draining her, not only of blood, but her energy too. The child's adoptive mother kept donating blood, but didn't have enough time to generate new red stuff. She was fighting a losing battle, and floated about the sawmill office every day as if she were the living dead. It was time to find other ways of feeding baby Starkweather. Shelley Starkweather started working 2 jobs to provide for her child, and became a criminal, resorting to robbing a bank, but not any old bank, the blood bank. She went down to the local blood bank one day in Oldcastle to inquire about donating blood. The last thing in her mind was donating blood. She didn't have enough of the damn stuff. In her gross innocence, Shelley intended to find a few bags of blood lying around. What did she think it was, an abattoir? Or a blood sausage factory? Miss Starkweather was misguided, but Providence was on Shelley's side that Tuesday evening. Shelley Starkweather was an amiable woman, see, and picked up friends with ease. It wasn't long before the bank secretary was offering part-time evening work to Shelley, and whoever said God doesn't work in mysterious ways? "What would my role be?" asked Shelley, getting very excited. "Collecting the blood in plastic pouches." Yes, what strange gods were looking down on Shelley Starkweather and her freak baby? The blood bank secretary continued speaking to Shelley, filling her in on what her duties would be, but all the adoptive mother could see was a pool of blood and her little cutie doing the backstroke in this flowing swimming pool of crimson. It was a 2-hour shift from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m., Monday to Friday. Shelley hired a childminder for the 2 hours every evening with the strict instructions that she shouldn't offer the child anything to eat, citing a strange allergy to various foods as the reason. By day, Shelley Starkweather worked with pints of donated blood, and by night she stole those pints. One night, a security guard got suspicious when Shelley left the clinic looking fatter than when she went in just 2 hours previous. He had been spying on her for days before springing on her and asking to see under Shelley's top. Shelley obliged the security man, combining his work duties with a sneaky "come on." She was looking for a man in her life to share the burden, i.e. feeding baby Starkweather. "Blood? You're stealing blood?" he asked Shelley, looking under her top, finding 5 pints of blood strapped to her body. "Am I missing something here?" Larry, the security guard, had the hots for her. Shelley knew this, and she would use it to her advantage. "I'm a sexy vampire, and this is my suicide vest." Timing was never Shelley's strong point. Ill-timed or not, Larry couldn't get enough of quirky Shelley and her blood fetish. Using love to her advantage, Shelley Starkweather told Larry she would go out on a date with him if he kept the topic of the stolen blood to himself. She explained, "It's a long story. I'll introduce you to him when you come around." "Who?" "The long story." A strict routine of working by day, stealing by evening, and feeding by night took its toll on Shelley. One might ask why Shelley didn't hand over the child to a specialist centre for demonic babies. First, such a place didn't exist in the small town of Oldcastle with a population of 7,209. And she knew she would lose her baby, and he would become a sideshow freak, a curiosity for the public. During this period of her life, Shelley Starkweather often wished she would go down into her sister's grave and ask her about the secret she took to that grave. Who is the baby's father? Baby Starkweather had turned 3 years old, and no male in town had ever shown any extra interest in the toddler. He was a mystery baby from a mystery man. 3. Shelley Starkweather introduced the man in her life to the long story, a.k.a. Baby Starkweather. What Larry saw, but failed to mention, was a cute little boy with a mouth that was a tad too wide for his face. He loved it when the toddler smiled at him, but sometimes the corners of that smile went right around to his earlobes, and the security guard struggled to hold his return smile. The child had a wonderful head of flame-red curls, but a wan complexion, and a dead stare that would be quite at home on death row. The baby had a pot belly, but Larry found that quite cute. But that was it. The child was always looking at him, but he would turn away when the security guard caught his lifeless gaze. The child was a watcher. Larry knew about this class of humans through his work. Fair enough, he didn't see many watchers at the blood bank, but he'd seen them at previous work posts, like at the Hillside Psychiatric Hospital out on the Coast Road. Sometimes Larry wanted to know what the little guy was thinking about with the far-off dead headlights he called eyes. But on second thoughts, perhaps he didn't want to know. A month later, the security guard moved into the thatched cottage on the side of the mountain, on Buck's Hill. He made it official by signing the paperwork to become the boy's legal guardian. That very evening, after signing all the relevant documentation, Larry asked Shelley to marry him. "What?" Shelley startled while surreptitiously cleaning baby's bloody face after supper. She still hadn't told Larry about his adopted son's strange diet. She wanted him in and settled before she broke that news. "I would like your hand in marriage." Shelley lit up with delight and agreed, but only on the proviso, "Only if you marry the rest of me, too, Lars." Larry loved Shelley's quirky sense of humour and bent over in a real gut-buster of laughter. While he was bent over, Shelley took this succinct juncture to sidestep in front of Baby to block Larry's view of the child. His face and Babe were smeared in the crimson stuff, and she needed to come up with an answer to the conversation that was coming one of these days. That short and sweet conversation would go something like, "What's up with the blood?" "Don't be silly. That's not blood, Lars. That's ketchup. He loves the stuff." "Well, be careful, because ketchup is full of sugar." If only. To Shelley's amazement, the security guard had never asked her where all the stolen blood was going. She had spun him the same story about blood sausage and how she loved to cook, but that would only stretch so far. Especially when they never ate blood sausage. She decided she needed to sit down with Larry and break it to him gently. Shelley would tell him on Saturday night, after she fed him enough alcohol to numb a horse. When Saturday night arrived, Shelley Starkweather got her man liquored up on one cocktail she liked to invent when she was feeling foxy. On this night, she unleashed her hairy canary upon Larry. "Fancy a hairy canary?" Judging by the security guard's lit reaction, Shelley assumed Larry thought her invite was sexual. She clarified the situation. It might have been easier just to make some Bloody Marys, but Shelley had her fill of all things bloody, thank you very much. Once Larry was rat-arsed on hairy canaries, Shelley revealed the truth about his adopted son. But instead of giving him a theory class, she opted for a practical class. She sat herself down by the open fire, and before Larry knew what was happening, Shelley had made a quick and efficient incision on a good vein in her left wrist. Security guard Larry screamed, "Jesus Christ above!" and ran to Shelley's side. She told him to relax and assured him that everything was okay. If everything's okay meant a 3-year-old boy smelling blood from the other side of the house and coming running to his mother with his jaw agape, resembling something only found in the murky depths of the Amazon River, then yes, everything was okay. The security guard fainted when he saw how the child latched onto his mama's wrist. When Larry came to, the first thing he saw was Shelley, flopped in the armchair, her deathly pale face aglow in the embers. There wasn't a sound in the kitchen, except for the rhythmic sucking of the child, siphoning blood from Shelley. Her arm hung over the armrest of the chair, while the overgrown baby worked on her wrist. Baby Starkweather turned around to look at Larry with a devilishly gory grin. That was it for Larry. He was packing his bags until Shelley told him about the night the infant almost died at the intensive care unit in Limerick City Hospital. She told him how the doctors couldn't help him, but they could. He was alive because of Shelley, but she couldn't keep up the bloodletting. The security guard found himself in a tight spot and had some major soul-searching to do. It wasn't long before a true abnormality of nature was living on the side of that normal hill where Shelley and Larry offered themselves to baby Starkweather nightly, one night on, one night off. Larry wanting to be a doting father figure for the child, offering himself up to be gorged and glutted upon. He had grown very fond of the strange little boy and convinced himself to donate a pint or two of the red stuff. After all, he was working at the blood bank and people were coming in off the street every day of the week and donating blood to strangers. The least he could do was donate blood to his adopted son. It was a noble cause. They took turns, like night watch, only blood watch. Years slipped by. Baby Starkweather turned 6 years old and was going to school. He was a normal child in every aspect of his education and progressed at the same rhythm as his peers. But he rarely, if ever, spoke, and that stare gave his teachers the heebie-jeebies. Baby's teachers recommended various tests to be done in a qualified centre. Shelley knew it was the genetic makeup of the boy, nothing to be troubled about. He never brought lunch to school, but he sat with his classmates in the schoolyard and enjoyed watching them eat their corned beef sandwiches. Or rather, he enjoyed them. The child didn't know why, but for some reason their necks seemed very attractive while they ate their tasty morsels. Baby liked how their interior and exterior jugular veins popped from the taut skin of their smooth necks when they worked their jaws. The bluish lines running beneath the skin transfixed him, and he could almost smell the blood spurting through those canals. Sometimes Shelley would turn up at the school on her lunch break at the sawmill and spy on her adopted son through the fence, running along the side of the schoolyard. At first it was just so uplifting to see him playing hide-and-seek with his classmates, but as the weeks passed by and her surreptitious visits increased, she realized Baby was always the one doing the seeking, and the other boys and girls were doing the hiding. And that was when Shelley realized the children were terrified of her adopted son. It was also around now when baby Starkweather outright refused to eat during daylight hours, preferring the sweet veil of darkness to glutton on his foster parents. Now, instead of a hearty breakfast, he would starve himself until nightfall, and then more than make up for his absent brekkies. Each night, Shelley Starkweather brought a piece of equipment from the blood donation clinic to allow for a pain-free extraction, and when she could, she would bring a pint or two while Larry watched out for her. It was a risk worth taking to give them a little relief from the razor teeth. Shelley set up a comfortable bloodletting station in the living room, establishing an IV line while they could watch their favourite TV programme while the youngster feasted. Once engorged, the child, only he never was a child, who are we kidding here, wiped the blood from his lips, slathering the red stuff across his chubby cheeks and falling into bed in a bloated trance. The happy though drained couple called it the Blood Diner Clinic instead of the Blood Donor Clinic. It was an in-joke only Shelley and Larry, soulmates and blood brothers on every level, would understand this mingling of blood. But a day came when Larry passed out at the blood bank. When the company doctor revised the security guard, she told him he had next to no blood pressure, which was ironic considering he was working in, well, a blood bank. The doc wanted to know where all the security guard's blood had gone. She asked as if Larry had misplaced his blood somewhere. He couldn't tell the doctor, but this was a wake-up call. Deciding there and then that he'd had enough of the freaks on the hill. The little tick was going to finish him some night, once up too many. Bye-bye, Larry. Such a noble, brave, and fucking stupid for having gone along with his lunacy. But that was when he made the grave mistake of telling Shelley he wanted to get out of the relationship. I married a bloodsucker! Why would you say that, Lars? I'm not the kid, Shelley. I married the kid. I give him everything, even my blood, damn it. Larry also told Shelley that he would go to the authorities because he couldn't have that little fiend on his conscience. Only Larry didn't know then that there was only one way out of this relationship. By dawn, Shelley Starkweather had put Larry in the potato patch. He'd always loved potatoes in their many eating forms, and she thought he would be much happier down amongst the tubers, and that his corpse would provide vital humus and fertilizer for the tubers was a sort of born-again experience. Someday in the future, Larry would be reincarnated as a plate of mashed potato, or pandy, as his dear mother used to call it. She called her Larry a pandy belly, as opposed to his freakish adopted son, who was a blood belly. Blood belly? No. Just no. It was a fitting end for Larry in Shelley's brain, which had become unhinged and diabolical somewhere along the way. Shelley, being a practical and desperate woman, decided Larry had to go to save her surrogate son. Larry knew too much. She knocked him out with a car jack and tied him to an armchair by the kitchen fireplace. Shelley took considerable comfort in the knowing that he hadn't died a painful death. Shelley convinced herself battering Larry to death with a car jack was a peaceful way to go. Her husband had died a noble death by feeding his adopted son, who sucked him dry as his light went out. Shelley Starkweather watched as the colour left the security guard's cheeks while he slipped into a coma, then slipped further down into death. As far as Shelley Starkweather was concerned, her husband died in his sleep. It was the best way to go, but ultimately it was the 6-year-old who took his life. That the security guard could offer one last meal to his surrogate son in death was indeed a righteous gesture, even if he had no choice. It was still an upstanding thing to do. Once she had buried Larry amongst the potato drills, Shelley flopped to the ground in a sweaty, panting heap, surrounded by stalks. It was here in this reverie, hidden from the world, where Shelley Starkweather realized she had created a monster, and that monster had to go. With teary eyes, Shelley got baby Starkweather ready for school, as she did every other morning. Considering what was ahead, she contemplated giving the little cannibal a day off school, just so that they could be together and make their last day count. But she wanted to have everything ready. He would be hungry when he came home. The freak of nature would be looking for his din-dins. While he was at school, Shelley Starkweather set up the bloodletting station. But this time, she added some additional elements. She had learned from experience that the human body can do remarkable things when in mortal danger. She saw how Larry pulled the sofa across the living room in his attempt to escape Baby's nipping chompers and sucking leeches for lips. Oh, yes, Shelley had to pop Larry on the head a second time with the carjack, though she would still insist her husband died a peaceful death in the bosom of his loved ones, who loved him so much that they ate him. Shelley had been drinking from a sneaky flagon of whiskey all morning at the sawmill, hoping she would be sufficiently numb when the time came. At 2 p.m. she left the sawmill and went to St. Malua's school to collect the entity known as Baby, and took him home to their little thatched cottage on the side of the hill known as Buck's Hill. It was a day like any other, until Baby saw the recent additions to the blood donation station. The shiny sets of handcuffs glinted in his dead eyes, each cuff locked onto objects which couldn't be moved when the time came. Yes, Shelley had created a monster, and the monster had to go because she was the monster. She had let this aberration of nature grow and flourish into something that should only exist in nightmares, and her life had become a nightmare. One might say she fed and nourished the problem. She was Frankenstein. Only Frankenstein's monster was a lovable and sympathetic creature, more humane than his master and creator. But Shelley couldn't say the same for Baby Starkweather, who wasn't lovable, sympathetic, or humane. He was a cold, slippery, blind thing, found under a rock and only came alive near the red stuff. How had she not seen this until now? Jesus Christ in heaven! Shelley was aware that the thing living in her house was a glorified mosquito and was just as happy feasting on Mommy as a stranger. Not only that, the youngster didn't possess an off switch when it came to knowing when he, the bloated leech, had a full belly. If left to its own devices, an engorged Baby Starkweather would eat himself to death. Equipped with this mortal knowledge, Shelley Starkweather put her immortal plan into action. Now was the moment while the blood creature was immersed in his maths homework at the kitchen table. It broke the sawmill worker's heart to see that the thing child loved school and could be someone someday. But she also knew he could eat someone someday. It was a question of when, not if. Baby Starkweather was a perversion of nature, and she needed to remind herself of that as she cut a discreet nick in her arm. As she sliced her flesh, she watched Baby stall, look up from his textbook, and stare off into space as the first tendrils of the crimson wafted below his hypersensitive nostrils. She sat in the armchair and strapped herself into the cuffs, one on each ankle and 2 more on her wrists. Once secured, she whistled to Baby. It spun away from the table and came running like a dog. That was the call she used to tell him Din-Dins was ready. She had flushed the handcuff keys down the toilet, and Shelley Starkweather was no Houdini. There was no getting away now as Baby Starkweather came bounding on all fours. Yes, it was something he did before feasting, falling back into his ancestral beginnings. Not that Shelley knew who those ancestors were. She didn't even know his father was, for crying out loud. Baby Starkweather homed in on the area of skin where Shelley had pricked herself. With fire in his eyes, the abnormality latched and sucked mechanically. It was a real downer in knowing that this would be the closest Shelley would come to motherhood and breastfeeding. Once Baby was sucking deep, and in that deeper trance he went into whilst feeding, Shelley produced the blade she'd nicked herself with and slashed a considerable gash on Baby's right wrist where he might have worn a wristwatch in another lifetime. As her life trickled away, she saw how the blood trickled from the freak's arm. That was her blood spurting from him onto the pockmarked linoleum. Baby was in such a feeding frenzy he hadn't even noticed when Shelley had cut a gash through him. This was the reality of the situation right here, right now. As the minutes passed by, she grew weaker and weaker, while watching the ravenous thing become swollen on her vital liquid. She saw the blood pour from its wrist. Once it had sucked her dry, it would go to work on its wrist. This was Shelley Starkweather's immortal plan, and what a beautiful plan it was. She just needed to stay awake to witness her scheme come to fruition. Baby, a cannibal at heart, would eat himself to death like some animals do. What a perfect way to go. If Baby Starkweather could choose a way to die, surely it would be to forage on himself. It was the ultimate act of sacrifice, and even though Shelley had grown a profound hatred for the little abnormality, she hoped he would find his gods wherever he was going. By the time the sun went down over Buck's Hill, Shelley Starkweather's blood pressure had also gone down dramatically. Her arms and legs were cold and her skin was clammy. She was confused and delirious, but not lost enough to know she had done the right thing. Baby Starkweather had sucked every drop of blood from her, and she awaited the angel of death to accompany her to the next life. When ballooning baby turned on himself for nourishment. A muffled thud sounded on the thatched roof. As her light went out, she tracked the footfalls over the snarling and sucking coming from baby as he supped and siphoned on his arm. As Shelley slipped into the valley of death, she heard scratching and scraping on the wall as whatever was outside came down the guttering. My angel of death. No, it couldn't be. Those same strange sounds as Shelley heard during that August long since gone came back to her memory. More irregular footsteps came right up to the back door. Through the frosted glass and the approaching mist of death, Shelley Starkweather saw a face peer through the window. That countenance gave Shelley such a shock that it stopped the clock inside her heart. But as she succumbed, the sawmill secretary realized she knew those lifeless eyes, because baby had the same eyes. And to her amazement, that came all too late. Shelley Starkweather knew her sister had seen the same face, but she had made the mistake of letting it into her bedroom and into her bed. It disappeared from the window. She heard it crawl up the outside wall and scramble across the long straw thatch. The thing was coming down the soot-tarred chimney. And now it crawled out of the fireplace. The dying coals didn't seem to make any impression on it. The stranger crossed the room from the chimney hearth and kissed Babe on the head before pulling him away from himself. Then Shelley slipped into a spiral as the unwanted guest, this abomination of unfathomable horror, helped himself to baby Starkweather's wrist. Oh, dear Jesus in heaven! It then latched onto her wound, left by baby's eager jaws. It was pure ecstasy, almost a sexual experience as the stranger with the sharp teeth and the pale, translucent face pumped blood back into her. In the low light thrown from the dying embers, Shelley saw he was handsome in an offbeat way, and understood why her sister might have opened her window to let him in one balmy night in a moment of weakness. A mingling of blood took place. The tall and very dark stranger snapped open those handcuffs as if they were made in China. Then everything faded to black. Night had descended when Shelley Starkweather felt herself coming back from a much darker place without ever knowing how she had got there. As she came back to life, she witnessed father and son climb into the fireplace and then crawl their way up the sooty chimney, scrambling up through the flue. She heard their feet shuffling on the thatched roof, and then there was nothing but the wind whistling around the eaves of the old cottage up there on Buck's Hill. She was moved to tears by it. Shelley was Frankenstein's monster, a woman with monstrous love pumping through her veins.